My name is Garrett Langley. I don't believe in poetic justice or karma, just numbers. They don't need to be fair, they only need to add up. For 17 years, I worked in the same office on the 14th floor of a glass building in Denver. I managed long-term financial portfolios for people who preferred results over flash, retired engineers, quiet millionaires, the occasional neurosurgeon. I wasn't flashy either, just consistent. The kind of man who double-checks parking meters even when they blink green. The kind of man whose wife said he was dull before asking for the salt. That was Melanie. She used to be a pharmaceutical rep for a company called Ilion. You've probably never heard of it. Most people haven't. But inside the industry, it was up and coming. She was one of their stars, ambitious, charming, always on planes, at conferences. With clients. We met at a financial networking event. I was presenting a case study on asset diversification. She was there for the open bar. She said she liked my tie. I didn't realize until much later she was testing whether I'd remember that detail. I did, and I passed back then. We built a modest house with big windows and hardwood floors. No kids, though we tried. What we had instead were investments carefully grown and tended over the years like tomato vines on a well-measured trellis. I never imagined she'd try to tear it all down with one phone call. It came on a Wednesday. I remember because the market had been sluggish all morning and I'd just finished adjusting a client's portfolio to hedge against currency volatility. I was boiling water for tea when my phone rang. Melanie's name lit up. She didn't say hello. Instead, Garrett, I've been thinking. That's how she began the demolition of 12 years of marriage. Not with rage, not with guilt, just with her usual quiet detachment. I'm not coming back, she said. I set the kettle down, still steaming. What's happened? She exhaled once, no waver in her voice. It's not about what happened, it's about what's always been. I need more. More than this house, these routines. There was silence between us, the kind you hear just before a speaker begins their presentation. Then came the reveal. I've met someone. His name is Russell. That was the first time I heard his name. It wouldn't be the last. He makes me feel seen, she added, as if it were a favor to explain. Then, the final twist of the knife. I've taken what's mine from the joint account. I had to. My attorney advised it. I nodded though. She couldn't see it. You've already spoken to a lawyer. It's better to be clear, Garrett. You'd agree with that, wouldn't you? The call ended soon after. No theatrics, just a digital beep as her name vanished from the screen. Stared at the kettle. The water had gone cold. She thought she'd walked away with that win. She hadn't yet realized I'd seen this coming months before. 3 months earlier, Melanie had attended what she called a strategic offsite in Scottsdale. But the hotel charge hit our account from Santa Fe. A small mistake. A misclick on her part, perhaps. 2 weeks later, she claimed to be meeting a client in Boulder. I checked the GPS logs from her car, which I had access to because I installed the security package myself. She'd driven downtown and parked in a garage near Ilion's regional office, the same garage Russell's name appeared on in a LinkedIn post from a company happy hour. Again, a small slip, but I noticed everything. That's why, over those months, I quietly restructured our finances. Melanie never liked going over the boring stuff, trust documents, limited partnerships, the dense stuff. So I handled it. I created a second joint account, put a small balance in it, just enough to look legitimate. The real money went elsewhere into a private trust with me as the sole trustee, shielded from joint liability, protected by layers Melanie didn't even know existed. She'd signed off on the paperwork without reading it. She'd been too busy texting someone during dinner. Russell probably. The funds she thought she'd withdrawn, $184,000, were sitting in a holding pattern. The account she targeted had dual verification for transactions over $5,000. She'd initiated it. She just hadn't gotten my approval. That night, I didn't drink. I didn't call anyone. I just sat at the table with a pen, a legal pad, and a clear head. I started writing down a list. A list of facts, not feelings. Facts. Her name, the date, the dollar amount she tried to move, the timing of her call, the names of the hotels, the line items on the card statements. Nothing emotional, just numbers. Numbers don't lie. People do. I didn't decline the transfer right away. That would have signaled I was aware and awake. I left it pending, let her sweat. The next morning I made 2 calls, one to my attorney and one to the bank manager who helped set up the trust. I asked her to prepare documentation showing our account's legal separation. That afternoon, I received a call, not from Melanie, from Vanessa. Vanessa was her closest friend. Also worked at Ilion. She was the maid of honor at our wedding. She'd helped Melanie pick out the curtains in our guest bedroom. She sounded nervous. Garrett, hey, this is awkward. I didn't say anything. She asked me to stop by to pick up some of her stuff. I nodded, though she couldn't see me. I see, she said. You'd know which drawer the jewelry's in, and if the transfer went through. So that was the real errand. I motioned toward the hallway. She knows the safe combination, I said. Vanessa hesitated. I think she's scared. She didn't expect you to be this calm. I didn't expect her to treat our marriage like a rental car, I replied. Vanessa flinched. She left with a small suitcase and no answers about the money. The transfer still sat blinking, pending, just like the truth, waiting to be confirmed. Asterisk. On Friday morning, I drove into the city as usual. Same suit, same coffee, same parking garage. The routine mattered. It signaled that I hadn't flinched, not to Melanie, not to her lawyer, and not to Russell. I took the elevator up to the 14th floor, walked through the automatic doors of Hawthorne Advisory Group, and greeted my assistant, Dana, with a quiet nod. She returned it, as always, then handed me a manila envelope. From the bank, she said, before whispering. Also, Melanie's called twice. Left no message. I didn't ask why she knew. Dana was intuitive like that. She also knew better than to press start inside my office. I reviewed the envelope's contents. Confirmation of the trust account's secure structure. Updated statements. The transfer Melanie initiated still hadn't been approved. It never would be. That the phone rang again. Melanie's name glowed against the screen. I let it go to voicemail. The truth is, we hadn't been a couple in years. We'd just been occupants of a lifestyle. Brunches, fundraisers, seasonal decor swaps. Things we did not because we loved them, but because it's what people like us were supposed to do. I had tried to recalibrate once, maybe twice. Booked a trip to Whistler. Bought her favorite wine. For a Tuesday night dinner, the response had been flat. She was always somewhere else, and that somewhere usually had Russell Phillips' name on it. He wasn't impressive. I'd seen his LinkedIn marketing fluff and buzzwords. His title, Regional Growth Strategist, Ilion Pharma. I knew what that meant. It meant he talked loudly at meetings, told other people's jokes, and ordered expensive appetizers. On the company card, Melanie once described him as dynamic. I saw a man trying too hard to disguise how replaceable he was. By Monday, Melanie's lawyer had entered the picture. His name was Calvin Sharp, the kind of man who added "esque" after his name on restaurant reservations. His email was succinct, passive-aggressive, and confident, clearly assuming I was in the dark. He demanded release of joint marital assets, immediate approval of the $184,000 transfer, and a list of our remaining holdings. I printed the email and slipped it into a red folder labeled Sharp. It went on a shelf next to one labeled Trust and another labeled Timeline. Melanie had gone to war with a man who made a living out of structuring information. At lunch, I walked to a nearby notary's office and had my response, affidavit, signed, a simple statement confirming my full cooperation in the financial separation, noting the dual authorization system, and the legal transfer of assets into a non-marital trust 6 months prior, with Melanie's signature on file, facts, paper, documentation, the kind of ammunition people like Calvin Sharp underestimated until it was too late. That evening, as the sun slid behind the Denver skyline, I sat on the back porch of the house Melanie had decorated so carefully, the one she now claimed she never wanted. I sipped a small glass of rye and listened to the faint hum of traffic 3 blocks away. The front gate creaked. Then the unmistakable sound of "Hi. Hills on brick." Melanie. She let herself in with the key she hadn't returned. Walked into the backyard like she still belonged there. Her expression was halfway between fury and disbelief. "You're ignoring me now," she said without greeting. I said nothing. She held out her phone. On the screen, the same message from the bank. Transfer denied. Dual authorization required. "You knew this would happen," she said. I nodded. "I did. You set me up." "No," I replied. "I protected myself." She took a step forward. "Half that money is mine." "Not legally," I said. "Not anymore." She stared at me, searching for the old version of myself, the quiet man who would back down, apologize, compromise. But he was gone. "You don't understand what you're doing," she snapped. Russell, I interrupted, "is not my concern." Her voice faltered. "You're not even angry." I was briefly. Silence hung between us like a fog. She stared at the glass in my hand. "You're going to regret this," she said, not like a threat, more like a habit. I walked toward the door. "I'll need the key," I said, holding out my palm. She hesitated. then dropped it into my hand. When I closed the door behind her, I felt something shift. Not victory, not vindication, just distance. Like a gate closing. The next morning I was back at my office when the call came from Thomas Hale, my attorney, an old friend, and one of the few people I trusted with my personal life. "She's hired someone loud," he said after reviewing Sharp's filings. "But the documents you've got, Garrett, this isn't even a contest. We're holding the line. Let's do it," I said. "And the trust? Completely insulated. She can't touch it." Thomas paused. "Then this may be over sooner than you think." I didn't smile. It wasn't over. It was transitioning from emotional betrayal to legal negotiation. Melanie thought this was about money, but it never was. It was about clarity, and I'd been preparing for this. Clarity longer than she'd been lying. It was a Thursday afternoon when the real shift came. I'd just finished rebalancing a legacy portfolio, a quiet $7.6 million account, owned by an ex-Navy admiral who preferred antique bonds over tech stocks. When Dana knocked on my door, "There's someone in the lobby," she said. Didn't give a last name, just said you'd want to hear what she has to say. I raised an eyebrow. "She's from Ilion," Dana added. That changed things. 5 minutes later, a woman in her late 40s entered my office. Tailored navy suit, no makeup, quiet eyes. She didn't offer her name until she sat down. "Jessica Harlow," she said. "Director of Human Resources." I'd heard the name before, in passing, through Melanie, in the early years. Jessica had once given Melanie her first big promotion. "I'm here unofficially," she said. This conversation didn't happen, and this, she reached into her leather bag and placed a thumb drive on the desk, was never handed over. I didn't touch it. Jessica folded her hands, calm and firm. "I don't like what's happening at my company. I especially don't like when it becomes predictable." I tilted my head slightly. "You're not the first, Mr. Langley," she said. I didn't need to ask what she meant. She answered anyway. "Russell Phillips has a pattern. Targets high-performing married women under him, makes promises, encourages them to act recklessly. And once their lives fall apart, he disappears. HR complaints get buried because his father is on the board." Her voice lowered. "But this time, it's different." She tapped the drive. "This time, there's evidence." That evening, I sat alone at home with my laptop open, the thumb drive plugged in. No passwords, no encryption, just a folder named RP Review, emails, dozens of them, between Melanie and Russell, dates spanning nearly 14 months, mentions of promotions, relocation plans, even real estate listings in Miami. But the most disturbing content wasn't personal. It was professional, confidential product documents, forwarded research memos, trial data summaries, all sent from Melanie's internal account to Russell's private Gmail. The timestamps were late, midnight, 2 a.m., 3:17 in the morning. She'd been accessing the company's research database remotely. In one email, Russell wrote, "Once we get clear of the accountant, everything accelerates. You'll be on the fast track. Miami, director title, the works." And Melanie's reply, "What about Garrett? His name's on most of the accounts. His insight could be useful." Russell's response was curt. "Forget him. Just get what you can." Then we cut clean. I closed the laptop. Betrayal was no longer just personal. Now it was criminal. Friday morning, I walked into Thomas Hale's office and slid the drive across the table. He scanned the folders in silence. "Espionage," he said flatly. "If they've been leaking data to a competitor, they have," I said. "There's a mention of a meeting with Valison, a European lab we once competed with." Thomas leaned back. "Garrett, this goes well beyond divorce court. I don't want to put her in prison." Thomas blinked. "Seriously, she's not innocent," I said, "but she's not smart enough to know what she was part of. Russell groomed her for this, professionally, personally. She believed she was being promoted. Instead, she was the pipeline. So what do you want to do?" I paused. I hadn't spoken the answer out loud until that moment. "I want her gone. Quietly, and I want this divorce closed, clean. My terms, no alimony, no split of the trust. She gets a check, an NDA, and a door." Thomas nodded slowly, "And the leverage we use it, but we don't broadcast it. One email. That's it." He studied me for a beat. Still the numbers guy, always. The proposal went out that afternoon. Melanie's lawyer, Calvin Sharp, responded within hours. His tone had changed. "We need to meet," the email read. "This weekend. Private setting. No press." New escalation, Thomas and I agreed. Sunday morning, in a quiet conference room overlooking the Denver courthouse, we sat at a long table. Melanie entered with Calvin. She looked thinner, nervous. Her eyes darted around the room. She didn't smile. Thomas opened with clarity. Our client offers a one-time payment of $50,000. No alimony, no claim to the trust. Immediate divorce proceedings. Mutual NDA. Calvin scoffed. This is laughable. After 12 years of marriage, Thomas interrupted. Let me finish. He slid a printout across the table. Calvin picked it up, read in silence. Then his shoulders dropped. Melanie reached across for the paper. Her fingers trembled. It was the email, the one where she'd forwarded. Proprietary research from Ilion's internal systems, timestamp, IP address. Her credentials, she looked up, her voice small. You're blackmailing me. No, I said calmly. I'm shielding myself. From you, from him, from this. Calvin leaned toward her and whispered something I couldn't hear. She turned away. Her jaw clenched. Do I go to prison? She asked. That depends, Thomas said. But we don't want that. We want closure. You sign, you walk away. She stared at the document for a long time, then signed. Melanie left the conference room with trembling hands, and no parting words. Thomas gathered the documents and placed them into a navy folder labeled Final. As we stepped into the hallway, he clapped a hand on my shoulder. She'll feel the consequences slowly, he said, which frankly is more educational than a trial. But I didn't feel triumphant. This wasn't a courtroom drama. There were no standing ovations, just the sound of footsteps on tile. A woman who once shared my pillow now walking away with less than she expected and more than she deserved. Later that evening, I sat in my kitchen, watching condensation roll down a glass of bourbon. Outside, the trees barely moved. It was one of those early autumn nights when the wind holds its breath. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. One new message. You think this ends with your silence? You've made a mistake. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The tone, the cadence, even the arrogance, it was Russell, still pretending to be untouchable. But by Monday, his bubble popped. That morning, a short article appeared in the Denver Journal's business section. Pharma executive Russell Phillips resigns. Amid internal review, no reasons given, no quotes, just one line buried at the bottom. Sources close to Ilion suggest the departure is related to irregularities in compliance practices. I sat at my desk and reread it twice, then deleted the browser tab. The following week I received a certified envelope at my office. From Ilion's legal department, inside, a formal offer. They wanted me to join as a senior compliance consultant. Temporary at first, possible long-term engagement. Jessica Harlow had signed the letter personally, with a handwritten note on the last page. Your integrity is rare. We could use more of it around here. Think about it. I did by Friday. I'd accepted. Not because I needed the money, but because I understood systems, and systems only improved when the right people asked hard questions from the inside. 2 weeks passed, with no word from Melanie. Then a text came, from Vanessa. She's not with him anymore. Just thought, you should know. That was it. No apology, no explanation, just a data point in a spreadsheet of human behavior. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Some equations correct themselves with time. At Ilion, I eased into the new role slowly. I started with their financial compliance logs, auditing expense claims, researching reporting discrepancies, mapping departmental redundancies. The work was dry, methodical, and strangely satisfying. In a way, it was the antidote to the chaos of the past few months. Numbers again. Unemotional, obedient, predictable. Jessica invited me to a quiet lunch on a Thursday. Not romantic, professional. She wanted insight into how Russell had manipulated not just Melanie, but the broader system. I told her about the emails, the timeline, and what I hadn't turned over, everything unrelated to industrial theft. She listened quietly, then said, you made the right calls. Not just legally, humanly. It wasn't praise, it was recognition. And for once, that felt more valuable. 1 month after finalizing the divorce, I moved. Smaller house, fewer rooms, no designer furniture, no custom wine fridge, but the place was mine, entirely. I planted herbs on the windowsill, set up a reading chair on the back porch, and bought a coffee grinder that actually made mornings enjoyable. I didn't date, not at first, not out of fear, just out of silence. I was getting used to it again. Then one night, while reviewing an internal report on Ilion's vendor relationships, I got a message from an unfamiliar contact, Catherine Lind. She was one of the in-house attorneys, part of the team handling the fallout from Russell's departure. We'd spoken once, briefly, about regulation timelines. This time, she wrote, I owe you a coffee. You caught what our whole team missed. I almost deleted it, but I typed back, black or with cream. She replied within seconds, black, strong like our legal strategy. We met the following Tuesday. She wasn't flashy, no curated charm, no layers of performance, just calm competence, a quiet sense of humor. And unlike Melanie, she didn't treat ethics like a speed bump on the way to something better. We talked about finance law, city hiking trails, the value of patience in an age of noise. It wasn't love at first sight, but it was trust at first conversation, and that felt rare. Back in Denver, Melanie had faded. Word through the industry was that she'd taken a job with a small medical supplier in Phoenix. Base pay, no bonuses, no corner office. Russell, last I heard, had moved to Florida. No job, still under quiet investigation. And Melanie, she hadn't reached out again. Maybe she wouldn't, or maybe she knew that silence was the only dignity. She had left. Either way, I didn't wait. Some stories end not with confrontation, but with distance. And in that distance, you learn the most important thing of all. Who you were before the betrayal doesn't matter. Who you become after it. That's the real calculation. It had been 1 year to the day since the night my phone lit up with Melanie's name. 1 year since she'd walked out, certain I wouldn't fight back. Since Russell Phillips had smiled behind conference doors, confident he'd gotten away with more than just a woman. And 1 year since, I'd realized that protecting what I'd built wasn't about holding on, it was about letting go. Wisely, I stood in the doorway of my new house that morning, coffee in hand. Smaller square footage, fewer distractions, but everything in it had a purpose, and nothing in it came with strings. The porch faced the mountains, the same mountains we used to hike. Back before the emails and the late-night lies and the quiet unraveling of everything we'd once pretended was secure, except now I no longer associated those peaks with Melanie. They were just mountains again. At Ilion, the consulting position had quietly shifted to something permanent. I now headed their financial integrity and ethics division. No title plaques, no fanfare, just a team of 4, a windowed office, and a mandate to rebuild trust in a company that had allowed too much silence. One day, Jessica Harlow walked into my office with a folder and Quarter review. She said, "But I think you'll like what's on page 3. I flipped through. There it was. An internal ethics scholarship program. Funded by Ilion, modeled on the compliance structure I'd built. Open to young professionals across the country pursuing certifications in ethical finance. The idea had started as a note on a legal pad months ago. Jessica had made it real. She tapped her pen on the edge of my desk. "We'd like to name it after you." I shook my head. "No names," I said. "Just numbers that balance." She smiled. "Fair enough." Catherine and I had made it to our 6th dinner. No drama, no games, just 2 people who didn't need to fill silences. She was sharp, understated, kind in a way that didn't need announcing. One evening, as we walked through a quiet Denver neighborhood after dessert, she asked me, "Do you ever regret how it ended?" I thought for a long moment. "Not the outcome," I said, "but maybe how long I pretended it wasn't happening." She nodded. "That's the hardest part for people like us. We expect patterns to correct themselves, but people aren't portfolios," I added. She smiled, slipping her arm into mine. "Still," she said, "I like how you manage your risks." Melanie never resurfaced. At least, not directly. A mutual friend, Vanessa, sent me a single email. She's teaching now. Community college in Tempe, lives in a small walk-up, says she's happy, but it sounds like someone trying to believe it. She doesn't talk about Russell anymore. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. Closure doesn't always come with apologies. Sometimes it just shows up in the form of silence that no longer feels heavy. Months later, I received a second envelope, this time from a university in upstate Colorado. They'd received the first batch of scholarship funds from a private trust, the same trust Melanie once tried to empty. They attached a thank you letter from a first-year accounting student, a woman named Yvonne, who'd grown up in foster care and wanted to work in financial literacy outreach. She ended her note with a line that stuck with me. "I want to make sure the people who grow up with nothing know how to protect what little they have." I folded the letter neatly and placed it in my drawer, the drawer where I once kept spreadsheets documenting lies. Now, it held something cleaner. One morning, I stood by the mirror adjusting my tie before a speaking engagement on financial ethics. It was a quiet moment, just the sound of my breath and the familiar rasp of fabric against collar. The man in the mirror looked the same, but something was different. He wasn't angry anymore. He wasn't betrayed anymore. He was just whole, not because everything had gone according to plan, but because he had. finally stopped needing it too. On the way out the door, I passed the living room shelf. There was only one photo now, not of Aspen, not of vacations or anniversaries, just a simple framed quote I'd found in a dusty bookstore. Some people will try to subtract from you. Make sure they only ever end up adding to your clarity. I smiled, locked the door, walked toward the car, and drove forward, not with revenge, not with regret, but with resolve. Because in the end, the numbers always tell the truth. And this time the truth had finally balanced.